year is 1887. The American West is still a wild, untamed frontier, a land of gold miners, outlaws, and a new kind of adventurer, the fossil hunter. In the Denver, Colorado area, a man named George Cannon finds two massive, petrified horns attached to a skull roof. He sends them to Othniel Charles Marsh, one of the most powerful and competitive paleontologists in history. At first, even the great Marsh is fooled. He looks at the size and the curve of the bone and concludes they belong to an extinct giant species of bison, which he names Bison alticornis. He assumes these horns are only a few thousand years old. He has no idea that he is actually holding the weapons of a creature that has been dead for 66 million years. It isn't until a year later, in 1888, that the truth begins to surface. A cowboy and professional fossil collector named John Bell Hatcher is working in the desolate, sun-scorched badlands of the Hell Creek Formation in Wyoming. Hatcher is a legend in the field, known for his uncanny ability to find bone where others see only dust. He discovers a skull so massive it requires a team of horses and a specialized wagon to move. When Marsh sees this new specimen, he realizes his mistake. This wasn't a buffalo, it was something entirely new, a three-horned face. He names it Triceratops. The discovery of Triceratops happened during the height of the Bone Wars, a bitter, decades-long rivalry between O.C. Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope. These two men were obsessed with outdoing each other, often resorting to bribery, theft, and even the destruction of fossils to ensure the other couldn't study them. Triceratops became one of the ultimate prizes in this war. Every new skull found was a volley fired in a scientific battle that defined American paleontology. But beyond the drama of the men who found it, the location of the find was equally significant. The Hell Creek Formation is a graveyard of the late Cretaceous. 66 million years ago, this wasn't a desert. It was a humid, forested coastal plain near an inland sea. It was a world of colossal pressure and competition. Triceratops was the dominant herbivore of this landscape. In some layers of the rock, Triceratops fossils are so common that they make up nearly 40% of all large dinosaur remains. To the people of the late 19th century, the Triceratops was more than just a dinosaur. It was a symbol of the American West, rugged, heavily armored, and built to stand its ground. As Hatcher and his team dug through the mudstones of Wyoming, they weren't just unearthing bone, they were uncovering the face of an era. The discovery proved that the age of dinosaurs didn't end with a whimper, but with a cast of characters more bizarre and formidable than anything human mythology could imagine. As we move forward, we realize that the face of the frontier was just the beginning. The real mystery lay in how this animal actually lived and how it used those three iconic horns to survive in a world ruled by tyrants. If you were to look at a Triceratops skull from an engineering perspective, you would see a vehicle designed for high-impact resistance. At the front sits a sharp, narrow beak, not unlike that of a modern parrot, but scaled up to the size of a shovel. This beak was designed for precision, allowing the animal to snip through the toughest cycads and palms of the Cretaceous. But move past the beak, and the anatomy becomes truly formidable. The defining feature, of course, is the three-horned face. You have the short, stout nose horn and the two massive brow horns that could grow to over a meter in length. For decades, scientists debated their purpose. Were they for attracting mates, or were they weapons? The answer lies in the bone itself. When we look at these horns under a microscope, we see fibrolamellar bone, a type of bone that grows quickly and is incredibly dense, designed to withstand massive shearing forces. These weren't just ornaments, they were lances. Supporting these weapons was the massive bony frill. While some ceratopsians had frills filled with large windows or holes to reduce weight, the frill of Triceratops was solid bone. This acted as a giant shield, protecting the vulnerable neck muscles and blood vessels from the teeth of predators. But the most ingenious bit of engineering isn't the shield itself, it's how it was attached. The Triceratops possessed a unique ball and socket joint at the base of its skull, called the occipital condyle. While most dinosaurs had limited neck movement, this circular joint allowed the Triceratops to rotate its massive head with incredible fluidity. Imagine a tank where the turret can spin and tilt in any direction instantly. This allowed the animal to keep its horns pointed directly at a moving threat, pivoting its multi-ton body on its front legs like a heavyweight boxer. Then there are the teeth. Behind that beak lay a dental battery, hundreds of teeth arranged in columns. As the top teeth wore down from grinding tough plants, new ones slid up from beneath to replace them. It was a self-sharpening system that ensured the animal could process massive amounts of calories to fuel its 5-ton frame. Finally, we look at the skin. Recent fossil impressions suggest that Triceratops might have had large hexagonal scales, and some scientists even speculate that the circular bosses on its skin may have sprouted bristles or quill-like structures. It was a walking fortress, a combination of a specialized harvester and a heavy armored vanguard. Every inch of its body was a response to a world that was trying to eat it, setting the stage for the most famous rivalry in the history of life. The confrontation between Tyrannosaurus Rex and Triceratops is often treated as a Hollywood monster movie, but for the animals involved, it was a high-stakes game of survival and physics. To understand this rivalry, we have to look at the forensic evidence etched into the fossils themselves. Paleontologists have found numerous Triceratops frills and horns with distinct circular punctures and deep grooves. These marks match the size, shape, and spacing of T-Rex teeth perfectly. But here is the fascinating part. Many of these bone scars show signs of healing. This tells us that these weren't just scavenged carcasses, these were live combatants. A Triceratops survived a bite from a T-Rex, lived to tell the tale, and its body spent years regrowing bone over the wound. This transforms our image of the Triceratops from a passive grazer into a battle-hardened survivor. In a fight, the two animals were perfectly mismatched. The T-Rex was an apex predator built for a single crushing bite, a win button of 5 tons of pressure. But the Triceratops was the ultimate countermeasure. While the T-Rex had height and bite force, the Triceratops had a lower center of gravity and a defensive shield that made a frontal assault nearly suicidal for the predator. If a T-Rex lunged, the Triceratops could use its ball and socket neck joint to parry the attack, potentially goring the soft underbelly or legs of the carnivore. A single puncture from a meter-long brow horn would likely result in a fatal infection or massive internal bleeding for the T-Rex. This forced the T-Rex to be tactical. Biomechanical models suggest that the tyrant king likely tried to flank the Triceratops, aiming for the hindquarters or attempting to get its jaws around the edge of the frill to whip the animal off balance. There's even gruesome evidence of decapitation behavior. Some Triceratops skulls have been found with the frill chewed off and the neck vertebrae bitten through, suggesting that after a kill, the T-Rex would use its massive neck muscles to pull the head off the body to reach the nutrient-rich muscle underneath the frill. This was a 2-million-year arms race. As the T-Rex grew larger and its bite more powerful, the Triceratops developed thicker bone and more agile neck mechanics. They lived in a state of violent equilibrium. The Triceratops wasn't just a victim, it was the reason the T-Rex had to evolve into the most formidable predator of all time. You cannot have one without the other. They were two halves of a brutal evolutionary masterpiece, locked in a dance of horns and teeth until the very end of the age of dinosaurs. In the late 2000s, a paleontologist named John Scannella and the famous Jack Horner proposed a theory that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. They looked at a massive collection of skulls from the Hell Creek Formation and noticed something strange. The Triceratops skulls were all solid-frilled and varied in size, but another, rarer dinosaur, called Torosaurus, had a much larger, thinner frill with two massive holes in it. The controversial theory? Triceratops and Torosaurus were not different animals. Instead, Triceratops was simply the juvenile or young adult, and Torosaurus was the elder form. This idea, known as the Toroceratops debate, suggests that as the animal aged, its solid bony frill began to stretch and thin out to save weight, eventually opening up those famous holes, fenestrae, as it reached massive elderly proportions. To prove this, researchers sliced into the bone of both dinosaurs. They found that Triceratops bone was still growing and active, while Torosaurus bone was mature, the bone of an animal that had finished its life's journey. But the transformation didn't stop at the frill. The horns changed too. We now have evidence of a growth series that shows Triceratops babies started with tiny nub-like horns that curved backward. As they reached teenager status, the horns straightened out. By adulthood, they curved dramatically forward. This suggests that a Triceratops changed its appearance so much throughout its life that a time traveler might mistake a child, a parent, and a grandparent for three entirely different species. This discovery forced us to rethink how we classify dinosaurs. If Triceratops changed this much, how many other species in our museums are actually just the kids and parents of the same animal? It makes the Triceratops more human in a way. It shows a life cycle, a process of aging and transformation that took decades. The debate isn't fully settled. Many paleontologists still argue that they are separate species based on the number of small spikes, or epoccipitals, around the edge of the frill. But whether they are the same animal or close cousins, the message is clear. The Triceratops was far more dynamic than the static, tank-like statues we see in museums. They were living, breathing organisms that grew, aged, and evolved their armor to meet the changing needs of their lives. For a long time, we imagined the Triceratops as a lonely wanderer, a prehistoric rhinoceros roaming the plains in solitude. However, recent discoveries have painted a much more complex picture. In 2005, a site in Wyoming revealed a bone bed containing 3 juvenile Triceratops buried together. This suggests that while adults might have been more solitary, the young lived in youth gangs or small pods for protection. Imagine a group of these subadults, their horns still curving backward, moving through the dawn mists of the Hell Creek floodplains. They communicated with low-frequency rumbles and used their brightly colored frills, which may have been flushed with blood to change color, to signal to one another. They were the monarchs of the twilight of the dinosaurs, a species that had reached its evolutionary peak just as the clock was running out. As herbivores, they were the landscape architects of their time. With their powerful beaks and massive weight, they crushed paths through the dense undergrowth, allowing new plants to grow and creating trails that other smaller dinosaurs used. They were the glue that held the ecosystem together. Without the Triceratops, the T-Rex would have had no primary food source, and the forest floor would have been an impenetrable tangle of vegetation. But then the world ended. 66 million years ago, a mountain-sized rock slammed into the Yucatan Peninsula. The Triceratops were among the last dinosaurs to see the sky turn red. Because they were large-bodied animals with high caloric needs, they were among the first to suffer when the impact winter set in. As the sunlight was choked out by ash and the forests began to die, the 5-ton tanks of the Cretaceous ran out of fuel. The Triceratops didn't go extinct because it was weak or an evolutionary failure. It was one of the most successful, durable, and well-armed animals to ever live. It went extinct because the rules of the game changed overnight. When the forests died, the armor and the horns, the things that had made them gods for millions of years, became a burden they could no longer carry. Today, we find their skulls turned to stone, tilted upward as if still defiant against the passage of time. They remain the most human of dinosaurs, not because they were like us, but because they represent the ultimate struggle of life against an unforgiving world. They were the 3-horned kings of a lost frontier, and though they are gone, their legend is written in the very soil beneath our feet.